Benjamin Morrison stood frozen in the doorway of his own mansion, watching something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his life. The meeting in Denver had been canceled due to the approaching storm, sending him home 3 hours earlier than usual on this gray January afternoon. He'd used the side entrance out of habit, moved through the grand foyer in silence, and now stood paralyzed outside a room he'd been avoiding for 3 years. Through the half-open door of the physical therapy room, he saw his 6-year-old son Dylan gripping parallel bars with white-knuckled determination, blood dripping from a scraped knee onto the white mat below. But that wasn't what stopped Benjamin's breath. It was Grace Campbell, their housekeeper, kneeling 5 feet away with arms outstretched but deliberately not touching, saying words that would haunt him forever. "Dylan, brave boys stand up on their own. Show me you're a warrior." And his son, his broken, abandoned son, was trying to stand. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Benjamin Morrison stood at 42 years old as one of America's most formidable tech entrepreneurs, though few would recognize him on the street. His salt and pepper hair, prematurely grayed from years of sleepless nights, framed a face that bore the weight of decisions involving billions of dollars and thousands of employees. The $5,000 suits custom-tailored on Savile Row couldn't disguise the exhaustion etched into every line around his eyes, couldn't mask the slight stoop in his shoulders that came from carrying grief too heavy for any one man. Forbes had dubbed him the untouchable billionaire, 3 years running, not for his wealth but for his impenetrable demeanor. Business partners spoke of him with equal parts admiration and wariness. He could dissect a failing startup's financials in minutes, identify the exact moment a negotiation turned, predict market shifts with uncanny accuracy. Yet he couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed. His corner office in downtown Aspen, a deliberate choice to avoid Silicon Valley's suffocating culture, held only one personal item: a photograph of Dylan at age 3, chubby-cheeked and grinning before the accident that had fractured their world. No recent photos existed there. Benjamin couldn't bear to see what his son had become, not because Dylan had changed, but because each image reminded Benjamin of his own failure to protect him. What nobody knew, what not even his executive assistant suspected, was that every Sunday at 3 in the morning, Benjamin drove 2 hours to Evergreen Psychiatric Facility. He parked in the visitor's lot, walked to the main building, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and sat in the hallway outside room 307. He never went inside. He simply sat there for 30 minutes, sometimes hearing Catherine's voice through the door, singing, crying, talking to people who weren't there, and then he'd drive home before dawn broke. He told himself he went to check on her, to ensure she was receiving proper care. The truth, which he couldn't quite admit even to himself, was that he went to punish himself, to sit with the consequences of every decision he'd made that terrible night 3 years ago. His daily routine had calcified into armor. Wake at 5:30, shower, dress in one of 7 identical suits, decision fatigue eliminated, leave the house by 6:30, always before Dylan woke. Drive 40 minutes to the office, bury himself in work until his assistant forced him to eat lunch. Afternoon meetings, evening calls with Asian markets, dinner ordered in, more work. Return home at 10, long after Dylan's bedtime. Pour exactly 3 fingers of Macallan 25 into a crystal tumbler, never 4 because 4 would mean he had a problem, and sit in his study until midnight, staring at financial reports he'd already memorized. He was running. He knew he was running. The question he couldn't answer was whether he was running from his son's pain or his own guilt. Perhaps there was no difference anymore. Dylan Morrison was 6 years old but carried himself with the careful awareness of someone much older. His blonde hair, the exact shade Catherine's had been before illness stripped the color from everything, fell across his forehead in a way that made visitors to the Morrison estate pause, struck by resemblance to a ghost. His blue eyes, bright as mountain sky, held an intelligence that unnerved the rotating staff of nurses and tutors who cycled through his life with professional efficiency and little warmth. Spastic diplegia cerebral palsy, the doctors had explained in clinical terms that couldn't capture what it meant to be a child trapped in a body that wouldn't cooperate. His legs, thin and resistant, required braces most days, and a wheelchair when distances stretched beyond his capability. But it wasn't the physical limitations that defined Dylan. It was the preternatural maturity, the way he'd learned to say, "It's okay, Daddy's busy," when yet another bedtime passed without his father's presence, the way he'd stopped asking when his mother would come home. The staff whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. Poor boy. Such a shame. So alone in this big house. Dylan had learned to make himself small, to need less, to be the easy child who never complained. If he was good enough, quiet enough, undemanding enough, maybe people would stop leaving. What nobody knew, what Dylan guarded more carefully than any other secret, was that every night at exactly 2:47 in the morning, he woke. Not from nightmare, though those came too, but from body memory his conscious mind couldn't quite access. 2:47 was when it had happened, the incident that had changed everything, though Dylan only knew this from fragments. The sensation of falling, a woman's voice crying, "I'll fix you, I'll fix you," then pain and his father's scream. In those pre-dawn hours, Dylan would slide from his bed, abandoning the custom wheelchair by his nightstand, and practice. The parallel bars Grace had installed 6 months ago stood in the corner of his bedroom, and Dylan would grip them with small hands, pulling himself upright through sheer determination. 1 step, 2. Sometimes he'd make it 5 steps before his legs gave out, sometimes only 3. He'd fall, always trying to fall silently so no one would hear, no one would stop him, no one would see him fail. Under his mattress, hidden where housekeeping staff wouldn't find it during their perfunctory cleaning, Dylan kept a sketchbook. Page after page showed the same drawing executed with improving skill over months. 4 people holding hands, a tall figure labeled Daddy in careful block letters. A small figure with yellow crayon hair labeled Me. A woman with brown hair labeled Grace. And at the end of the chain, always on the far right edge of the paper where she could step off and disappear, another woman. Sometimes this 4th figure had a face. Sometimes Dylan left it blank. Sometimes he drew her in white crayon on white paper so she was there but invisible unless you held the page to the light. Dylan had stopped asking about his mother after the 3rd birthday she'd missed. The adults gave contradictory answers. "She passed away," his father would say, voice tight. "She's very sick," Grace had told him once, not knowing she contradicted the official story. "She's in heaven," his grandmother had offered during one brief visit. But Dylan had heard his father on the phone late at night, had heard him say, "How is she today?" and "I'll increase the monthly payment." Dead people didn't require payments. Sick people were in hospitals you could visit. Dylan had concluded, with the inexorable logic of a child trying to make sense of abandonment, that his mother had left because he was broken. The leg braces, the wheelchair, the way he couldn't run and play like other children. These were the reasons she'd gone. If he could just fix himself, become normal, maybe she'd come back. Maybe his father would stop looking at him with that expression Dylan couldn't name but felt in his stomach like swallowing stones. So he practiced, alone, in the dark. Falling and rising and falling again, each small victory measured in seconds of standing, inches of forward progress. Grace helped during the day, but those sessions were official, supervised, safe. The nighttime practices were Dylan's secret battle, fought in silence and solitude, driven by the desperate hope that if he could just walk normally, everything else would fall into place. He'd learned to read medical websites, typing searches into the tablet the tutors used for his lessons. Cerebral palsy cure. How to walk with CP. Can cerebral palsy be fixed? The answers were always discouraging, but Dylan had also learned that adults were often wrong about what was possible. Grace said so herself. Never let anyone tell you what you can't do. So Dylan kept trying, kept falling, kept getting up. Because the alternative, accepting that his mother had left for reasons he couldn't fix, was unbearable. The confrontation in the therapy room stretched between them like a chasm neither had anticipated crossing. Grace stood with her hands twisted in the cleaning rag, her worn fingers trembling slightly as she waited for what she assumed would be termination. She'd overstepped. She knew she'd overstepped. Housekeepers didn't install therapy equipment in their employers' homes. They didn't take it upon themselves to rehabilitate children who had access to the best medical care money could buy. They stayed in their lane, collected their modest paychecks, and went home to their own problems. But Benjamin's first question wasn't the accusation she'd braced herself for. "How long has this been happening?" Grace's chin lifted defensively. 6 months, Mr. Morrison. I complete all my assigned duties first. I use my lunch break and stay late without requesting overtime. The equipment, I purchased it myself from a medical surplus store in Boulder. I haven't neglected any aspect of my employment, and I can provide receipts if you... Benjamin held up one hand, stopping her justification mid-flow. I didn't ask if you were shirking your work, Ms. Campbell. I asked how long my son has been making this kind of progress without my knowledge. The distinction landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Grace's defensive posture eased slightly into something more uncertain. She studied Benjamin's face, trying to read whether this was some elaborate corporate trap, some test of boundaries she was failing. "Where did you learn physical therapy?" Benjamin asked, moving to the window that overlooked the grounds where early snow had begun to accumulate. "Your employment file says you have a high school diploma and 2 years of community college. Nothing medical, no certifications." Grace swallowed hard. This was where the truth got complicated, where her past and present tangled into knots she'd spent 10 years trying to unravel. "My younger brother," she said finally. "Liam. He had mobility issues after a car accident. Not exactly like Dylan's condition, but similar enough. Our family couldn't afford formal therapy sessions beyond what insurance covered, which wasn't much. So my mother and we went to every appointment, every session we could. I watched everything. I learned. I asked the therapists questions. They were kind enough to show me exercises I could do with him at home, ways to stretch his muscles, techniques to build strength." Benjamin's reflection in the window glass showed his attention sharpening. Had? Past tense? Grace's eyes dropped to the mat still marked with Dylan's blood. "He passed away 10 years ago. He was 14. I was 16. The silence that followed felt heavy with all the things they weren't saying. Benjamin turned from the window, and Grace was startled to see moisture in his eyes. The untouchable billionaire the man Forbes called impenetrable was crying. Not dramatically, not with sobs or gasps, but with the quiet tears of someone who'd forgotten how. "Tell me what happened to him," Benjamin said, and it wasn't a demand but a request. So Grace told him. The October night rain had made the roads slick as glass. The drunk driver who'd run the red light at the intersection of Highway 36 and Table Mesa Drive, T-boning the Campbell family's 15-year-old Honda. The emergency room at Boulder Community Hospital, where doctors explained that Liam needed spinal surgery within 72 hours to prevent permanent paralysis below the waist. The insurance company that promised to review the case as quickly as possible, but took 6 days to approve what should have been an emergency authorization. The infection that set in while they waited, the sepsis that followed, the funeral that came after. "I was 16 years old," Grace said, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her freckled cheeks. "I sat in that hospital room and held my brother's hand while he died, and I promised him I'd become a physical therapist. I'd help other kids. I'd make sure no one else had to go through what he went through because of bureaucracy and money and stupid preventable delays." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "But after the medical bills came due, after we paid for his funeral, after my mother worked herself nearly to death trying to keep us housed and fed, there was nothing left for my college tuition. I worked retail, cleaning jobs, whatever I could find. And I watched other people's children grow up healthy and strong while my brother stayed 14 forever." Benjamin moved to one of the therapy benches and sat heavily, the careful crease of his $5,000 suit forgotten. When he looked up at Grace, his gray-blue eyes held something she'd never seen there before, recognition of shared pain. "I donate $2.5 million every month to Children's Hospital in Denver," Benjamin said quietly. "Have you seen the new pediatric wing, the Morrison Center for Pediatric Rehabilitation? That's me. I fund research, state-of-the-art equipment, full scholarships for medical students specializing in pediatric care. I write checks that could have saved your brother's life 10 times over." He paused, his jaw working as if chewing something bitter. "But I can't spend 5 minutes a day with my own son." Grace took a step forward, her natural instinct to comfort overriding the employee-employer boundary that had defined their relationship for 18 months. "Mr. Morrison, do you know what Dylan's favorite color is?" Benjamin interrupted, his voice rising slightly with an edge that might have been anger or desperation or both. "His favorite food." "What nightmares wake him up at 2:47 every single morning? What makes him laugh? What scares him so badly he can't speak?" He laughed, a harsh sound devoid of any humor. "I don't know any of it. I don't know my own son. But I suspect you do." Grace nodded slowly. Blue, the exact shade of the Colorado sky right before sunset in summer. Blueberry pancakes, but only if the blueberries are fresh, never frozen. He says frozen ones taste sad, and he dreams about someone leaving in the snow. He won't tell me who, but he wakes up every night at exactly 2:47. I've checked the clock. It's always the same time. Benjamin's hands, which had been gripping his knees, went slack. The evening of Benjamin's discovery marked the beginning of a transformation that would unfold with the relentless inevitability of a mountain storm. After sending Dylan upstairs, Benjamin stood in the therapy room facing Grace Campbell. And for the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to ask the questions he'd been too afraid to confront. Grace's hands twisted the cleaning rag she'd been holding when Benjamin interrupted their session. Her worn fingers, reddened from years of scrubbing floors and washing dishes, trembled slightly as she waited for what she assumed would be termination. She'd overstepped. She knew she'd overstepped. Housekeepers didn't install therapy equipment. They didn't take it upon themselves to rehabilitate their employers' children. They stayed in their lane, collected their modest paychecks, and went home. But Benjamin's first question wasn't an accusation. It was simpler and somehow more devastating. "How long has this been happening?" Grace's chin lifted slightly, defensive instinct kicking in. 6 months, Mr. Morrison. I finish all my assigned duties first. I use my lunch break and stay late without additional pay. The equipment, I purchased it myself from a medical surplus store. I haven't neglected any aspect of my employment." Benjamin held up one hand, the gesture stopping her justification mid-flow. "I didn't ask if you were shirking your work, Ms. Campbell. I asked how long my son has been making this kind of progress without my knowledge." The distinction landed between them like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward. Grace's shoulders dropped slightly, her defensive posture easing into something more uncertain. She studied Benjamin's face, trying to read whether this was some elaborate corporate trap, some test of loyalty or boundaries she was failing. "Where did you learn physical therapy?" Benjamin asked, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. "You're not licensed. Your employment file says you have a high school diploma and 2 years of community college, nothing medical." Grace swallowed hard. This was where the truth got complicated, where her past and present tangled into knots she'd spent 10 years trying to unravel. "My younger brother," she said finally. "Liam. He had mobility issues, not exactly like Dylan's, but similar. Our family couldn't afford formal therapy, so my mother and we went to every appointment, every session the insurance would cover. I watched, I learned, I asked questions. The therapists were kind enough to show me exercises I could do with him at home." "Had?" Benjamin's attention sharpened on the past tense. Grace's eyes dropped to the floor, to the white mat still marked with Dylan's blood from his scraped knee. "He passed away 10 years ago. He was 14. The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things they weren't saying. Benjamin moved to the window, looking out at the early evening darkness, the first snowflakes of Storm Cassandra beginning their lazy descent. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone confessing rather than interrogating. "What happened to him?" Grace told him. Not the sanitized version she'd given to previous employers when they asked about the brother mentioned in passing, but the real story. The car accident on a wet October night, the drunk driver who'd run a red light, the emergency room doctors saying Liam needed spinal surgery within days to prevent permanent paralysis, the insurance company's delay, the endless phone calls, the 6 days of waiting that turned into infection, the infection that turned into sepsis, the sepsis that turned into a funeral. "I was 16, Grace said, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. "I promised him I'd become a physical therapist. I'd help other kids. I'd make sure no one else had to go through what he went through. But after the medical bills, after the funeral costs, there was nothing left for college. My mother was working 3 jobs just to keep us housed and fed. So I worked, retail, cleaning, whatever paid, and I watched other people's children grow up healthy while my brother stayed 14 forever." Benjamin turned from the window, and Grace was startled to see moisture in his eyes. The untouchable billionaire, Forbes's favorite enigma, was crying, not dramatically, not with sobs or gasps, but with the quiet tears of someone who'd forgotten how. "I donate $2.5 million every month to Children's Hospital," Benjamin said. "Have you noticed the new pediatric wing, the Morrison Center for Pediatric Rehabilitation? That's me. I fund research, equipment, scholarships for medical students. I write checks that could have saved your brother's life 10 times over." He paused, his jaw working as if chewing something bitter. "But I can't spend 5 minutes a day with my own son." Grace stepped forward, her natural instinct to comfort overriding the employee-employer boundary. "Mr. Morrison, do you know what Dylan's favorite color is?" Benjamin interrupted, his voice rising slightly with an edge that might have been anger or desperation, or both. "His favorite food. What nightmares wake him at 2 in the morning? What makes him laugh? What scares him?" He laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. I don't know my own son, but I suspect you do." Grace nodded slowly. "Blue, the exact shade of the sky right before sunset in summer. Blueberry pancakes, but only if the blueberries are fresh, not frozen. He dreams about someone leaving in the snow. He won't tell me who, but he wakes up at 2:47 every single night. He laughs when you call him Champ or Buddy or any of those generic dad names, but I don't think he believes you mean it. And he's scared." She stopped, uncertain if she should continue. "Scared of what? That he's the reason his mother left. that he's too broken for anyone to love properly, that everyone who gets close to him will eventually realize he's not worth the effort and disappear. Benjamin's knees seemed to give out. He sat heavily on the padded bench meant for therapy sessions, his expensive suit creasing, his perfectly styled hair falling forward as he dropped his head into his hands. For several long moments, the only sound was the soft whistle of wind picking up outside, the storm gathering strength. When Benjamin finally looked up, his face had changed. Some mask had cracked, revealing the exhausted, grieving father beneath the corporate armor. "I want to hire you properly," he said, "not as a housekeeper, as Dylan's full-time therapeutic companion. I'll fund your education, a complete physical therapy degree, accelerated program if you want it, traditional if you prefer. Meanwhile, you continue what you've been doing with Dylan, but officially, with proper compensation, I'll triple your current salary, and I'll establish a trust fund for your mother. Margaret, isn't that her name?" Grace's breath caught. "How do you know my mother's name?" "I'm a thorough employer, Ms. Campbell. I know she's 68 years old. I know she works the night shift at a warehouse in Boulder because it pays $3 more per hour than the day shift. I know she has a heart condition, atrial fibrillation to be specific, that she can't afford to treat properly because she let her supplemental insurance lapse to help pay your rent when you were between jobs last year." The color drained from Grace's face. "You investigated me?" "I investigate everyone in my household. It's not personal. It's security protocol." "But the information has been sitting in a file I never bothered to read until today." Benjamin stood, some of his usual composure returning. "Your mother shouldn't be working at all, much less night shifts. The trust will cover her living expenses, medical care, everything. And before you refuse out of some misplaced pride, consider that this isn't charity. This is compensation for what you've already done for my son, for what you'll continue to do, and for teaching me something I should have learned 3 years ago." "What's that?" "That running from pain doesn't make it hurt less. It just makes you a coward." Benjamin moved toward the door, then paused. "I'm canceling my meetings tomorrow. All of them. I want you to teach me Dylan's routine. Every exercise, every encouragement technique, every small victory he's achieved that I've been too absent to notice. If you're going to be his therapeutic companion, then I'm going to be present too. Not as the man who signs the checks, but as his father. Can you teach me that?" Grace's throat tightened with emotion she couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe. Or relief that she wouldn't have to carry this burden alone anymore. "I can try, Mr. Morrison." "Ben," he corrected softly. "If we're going to do this, if we're going to help Dylan together, you should call me Ben." The next morning arrived gray and heavy with impending snow. Benjamin woke at 5:30 as usual, but instead of immediately reaching for his phone to check overnight emails from Asian markets, he lay still, listening to the unfamiliar quiet of his own home. Somewhere down the hall, Dylan would be sleeping. Or perhaps not sleeping. Perhaps already awake at this hour, practicing those secret exercises Grace had mentioned, the nighttime sessions Dylan thought no one knew about. Benjamin had known, of course. The security cameras throughout the house recorded everything, backed up to encrypted servers he reviewed quarterly for liability purposes. He'd seen Dylan's lonely 2 in the morning struggles, had watched his son fall and rise and fall again with no one there to witness his determination. Benjamin had watched from thousands of miles away, metaphorically speaking, seeing everything and doing nothing. At 7 o'clock, Benjamin appeared in the kitchen dressed not in one of his usual suits, but in jeans and a simple sweater. Clothes he'd had to search for in the back of his closet, relics from a life before constant board meetings and investor calls. Grace was already there, preparing breakfast, and the surprise on her face would have been comical under different circumstances. "Good morning, Ben." she said carefully, testing the use of his first name. "Good morning, Grace. Where's Dylan? Still sleeping?" "He usually wakes around 7:30. Then I'll wait." Benjamin poured himself coffee, black, no sugar, the same way he'd been drinking it for 20 years, and sat at the kitchen island. The domestic normalcy of it felt strange, like wearing someone else's clothes. This was his house, but he'd never truly lived in it. He'd existed here, slept here occasionally, but lived, no. When Dylan appeared at 7:35, rolling himself into the kitchen in his small wheelchair with sleep-mussed hair and pajamas decorated with cartoon dinosaurs, the boy stopped short at the sight of his father. "Daddy?" Dylan's voice carried a note of concern. "Are you sick? Did something happen at work?" Benjamin's heart cracked at the question. His son's first assumption upon seeing him home at breakfast wasn't happiness, but worry that something was wrong. What did that say about the life they'd been living? "Nothing's wrong, champ," Benjamin said, then caught himself. Grace had said Dylan liked those generic dad names but didn't believe the affection behind them. "Actually, that's not entirely true. Something has been very wrong for a long time, and I'm here to start fixing it. I'm not going to work today. I'm going to spend the day with you and Grace, if that's okay with you." Dylan's blue eyes, Catherine's eyes, the eyes Benjamin both loved and couldn't bear to look at, widened with cautious hope. "The whole day?" "The whole day. I want to see your therapy routine. I want to learn how to help. I want to—" Benjamin's voice caught and he had to clear his throat. "I want to be your dad. Not just the man who lives in the same house. Is that all right?" Dylan's small face worked through several emotions, wariness giving way to tentative joy. "Can we have blueberry pancakes for breakfast?" Grace smiled, already reaching for the mixing bowl. "Fresh blueberries coming right up." As Grace cooked and Dylan chattered about a book his tutor had read him yesterday, Benjamin felt something shift inside his chest. Not healing, that would take far more than one morning, but the first small movement of ice beginning to thaw. He'd spent 3 years frozen, trapped in the moment of his worst failure, unable to move forward or back. Perhaps, with Grace's guidance and Dylan's forgiveness, he could finally learn to live in the present instead of being haunted by the past. Outside, the snow began to fall in earnest, Storm Cassandra announcing her arrival. The Weather Service had upgraded their warnings to blizzard conditions, predicting the worst storm in 20 years. Roads would close. Power might fail. The world would contract to just this house, just these 3 people, trapped together whether they liked it or not. Benjamin watched the snow accumulate on the windows and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation instead of dread. Let the storm come. Let them be trapped together. Maybe isolation was exactly what his fractured family needed. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Nothing to do but finally face each other honestly. The first day of the rest of their lives had begun. And outside, the storm gathered its strength, preparing to change everything. The morning therapy session began at 8 o'clock in the converted sunroom that Grace had transformed into Dylan's rehabilitation space. Benjamin had walked past this room hundreds of times over the past 6 months, never once stepping inside, never acknowledging its existence beyond approving the household expense report that included medical equipment as a line item. Now, standing at the threshold, he saw it properly for the first time. The parallel bars Grace had installed ran the length of one wall, their aluminum rails worn smooth where small hands gripped them daily. Foam mats covered the floor in interlocking squares of blue and gray. A full-length mirror occupied the far wall, its surface marked at regular intervals with pieces of colored tape. Measuring progress, Benjamin realized, markers of how many steps Dylan could take before his legs gave out. A whiteboard tracked daily achievements in Grace's neat handwriting. January 14th, 52 steps. January 13th, 47 steps. January 12th, 51 steps. Dylan wheeled himself to the parallel bars with practiced efficiency, positioning his chair at the starting point. Grace knelt beside him, her movements gentle but purposeful as she helped him transfer his weight from chair to bars. "We always start with stretching," Grace explained, glancing at Benjamin. "Dylan's muscles tighten overnight. If we don't warm them up properly, he risks injury." She guided Dylan through a series of stretches, her hands supporting his legs while explaining the purpose of each movement. "This one loosens the hip flexors. This targets the hamstrings. Feel that pull, Dylan? That's good tension, not bad tension. Can you tell the difference?" Dylan nodded, his face serious with concentration. "Good tension feels like stretching a rubber band. Bad tension feels like the rubber band might snap." Benjamin moved closer, kneeling on Dylan's other side. "Can I help?" Grace hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Support his right leg here. Keep the knee straight, but don't force it. Let Dylan's body tell you how far it can go today. Every day is different." Benjamin's hands shook slightly as he touched his son's leg. The last time he'd done this, Dylan had been an infant, and Benjamin had been checking for the injuries Catherine had inflicted. He forced the memory away, focusing instead on the present moment, on the warmth of Dylan's skin through his pajama pants, on the small tremor of muscles working hard to cooperate. "Like this?" Benjamin asked. "Perfect," Grace said. "Now hold it there for a count of 10. Dylan, deep breaths, in through your nose, out through your mouth." They worked through the full stretching routine, Grace narrating each movement's purpose, Benjamin following her instructions with the same intense focus he brought to business negotiations. Dylan watched his father with an expression that cycled between hope and disbelief, as if expecting Benjamin to suddenly remember an urgent meeting and disappear. After 20 minutes of preparation, Grace deemed Dylan ready to walk. She positioned herself at one end of the parallel bars while Benjamin took the other end, both of them far enough away that Dylan would have to work to reach them, but close enough to catch him if he fell. "All right, warrior," Grace said, using her nickname for Dylan. "Show your dad what you've learned. 5 steps to start, nice and controlled." Dylan gripped the bars, his knuckles whitening with effort as he pulled himself upright. His legs, thin and resistant, locked into a standing position. For a moment he simply stood there, and Benjamin realized with a start that even this, just standing, was an achievement worth celebrating. "Ready?" Grace prompted. Dylan nodded. He lifted his right foot, swung it forward with visible effort, and planted it 6 inches ahead of his left. The motion was jerky, uncoordinated, nothing like the smooth steps of a typical 6-year-old. But it was movement. It was progress. It was his son fighting with everything he had to do, something most people never thought about. 1, Grace counted. "Breathe, Dylan. Don't forget to breathe." Left foot forward. Awkward, dragging slightly, but forward nonetheless. 2, excellent. Keep your core tight like I taught you. Right foot again. Dylan's face contorted with effort, a small sound escaping his throat, not quite pain but the edge of it. 3. You're doing great. 2 more. Benjamin watched, transfixed. He'd seen professional athletes push their bodies to extraordinary limits. He'd watched Olympic swimmers, marathon runners, gymnasts performing impossible feats. None of it compared to this. None of it carried the weight of his 6-year-old son refusing to surrender to a body that fought against him at every turn. 4. Grace's voice carried encouragement and steel in equal measure. 1 more, Dylan. Show your dad you're a warrior." Dylan's right leg trembled violently as he lifted it for the 5th step. For a terrifying moment, Benjamin thought his son would fall. But Dylan's grip on the bars held firm, and his foot found purchase, and suddenly he was within reach of Benjamin's waiting arms. 5! Grace shouted, genuine joy in her voice. You did it! That's a new record for first thing in the morning. Dylan collapsed forward into Benjamin's arms, his small body shaking with exertion. Benjamin caught him automatically, and suddenly he was holding his son, really holding him, for the first time in 3 years. Dylan's arms wrapped around Benjamin's neck, his breath coming in gasps against Benjamin's shoulder. Did you see, Daddy? Did you see me walk? Benjamin's throat closed. He couldn't speak, couldn't force words past the emotion lodged there like a stone, so he simply held Dylan tighter, one hand cradling the back of his son's head, and nodded against Dylan's hair. He saw, Grace said softly, her own eyes bright with tears. He saw everything. They rested for 5 minutes, Grace bringing water for Dylan and a towel to wipe the sweat from his forehead. Benjamin couldn't stop touching his son. Small, fleeting contacts, as if reassuring himself Dylan was real, was here, was his. We'll do 3 more sets, Grace explained, with rest periods in between. By the end of the session, Dylan will probably manage 7 or 8 steps. The last set is always the hardest because he's tired, but also sometimes the best because his muscles are fully warm. Every session ends with stretching again to prevent cramping. They continued for another hour. Benjamin learned the rhythm of therapy: encouragement, rest, repetition, patience. He learned that Dylan had good days and bad days, that progress wasn't linear, that sometimes moving backward was part of moving forward. He learned that his son was stronger than he'd ever imagined, not despite his disability, but because of what he chose to do with it. Between sets, Grace shared stories Benjamin had never heard. How Dylan had cried the first time he'd managed to stand for 30 seconds, not from pain, but from joy. How he'd asked Grace to teach him the medical terminology for his condition because, if it's going to be part of me forever, I should know its name. How he'd started a drawing project documenting his progress, measuring each day in steps rather than hours. He draws? Benjamin asked. Constantly, Grace said. Mostly pictures of... She stopped, glancing at Dylan, who had suddenly gone very still. Well, family pictures. People holding hands. Something in her tone suggested there was more to this story, but before Benjamin could pursue it, Dylan spoke up. Grace, can I show Daddy the chart? Grace smiled. Of course. It's your chart, Dylan. You've earned the right to show it off. Dylan wheeled himself to a filing cabinet in the corner and retrieved a large poster board. When he unrolled it, Benjamin saw a meticulously maintained graph, steps on the vertical axis, dates on the horizontal axis, a jagged line climbing slowly but steadily upward over 6 months. At the top, in Dylan's careful 6-year-old handwriting, Dylan's journey to walking. Grace says every journey needs a map, Dylan explained. This is mine. See? In July I could only do 10 steps. Now I can do 52. By my birthday in April, Grace thinks I might be able to do 100. Benjamin studied the chart, noting the occasional dips where progress had reversed, the plateaus where numbers stayed flat for weeks, and the triumphant spikes where breakthrough days had occurred. Each data point represented pain endured, determination summoned, disappointment overcome. His son had been fighting this battle every single day, and Benjamin had known nothing about it. It's remarkable, Benjamin said, and meant it. You're remarkable. Dylan's face lit up with an expression of pure happiness that cut Benjamin to his core. How starved had his son been for approval, for attention, for the simple acknowledgement of his father's pride. The morning session ended at 9:30. Dylan was exhausted, his legs shaking from effort, but his spirits were higher than Benjamin had seen them in years. As Grace helped Dylan back into his wheelchair, the boy looked up at his father with shining eyes. "Will you be here for afternoon practice too?" Benjamin thought of the 12 meetings scheduled for that afternoon, the conference call with London investors, the quarterly report that needed his review. He thought of his office, his refuge, his excuse for 3 years of absence. Then he looked at his son's hopeful face and made a choice that felt simultaneously terrifying and inevitable. "I'll be here," Benjamin promised. "For afternoon practice, for dinner, for bedtime. I'll be here, Dylan. I should have been here all along." Outside, the snow fell harder now. Storm Cassandra announcing her intention to trap them together. The Weather Service had upgraded the warning again. Travel would be impossible by evening, roads already treacherous, the storm system larger and more dangerous than initially predicted. They would be isolated here for days, just the 3 of them, with nowhere to hide from each other or themselves. Benjamin pulled out his phone and began typing emails. Meeting canceled. Conference call rescheduled. Report delegated to his second-in-command. His assistant responded with increasingly frantic messages. "Are you sure these are important commitments? The board won't be happy." But Benjamin ignored them all. For 3 years he'd put everything else first. For the next 5 days, trapped by weather and circumstance and his own long-overdue reckoning, nothing would come before his son. "Grace," Benjamin said as she prepared lunch, "teach me everything. Not just the therapy, but everything. What makes him laugh? What scares him? What he dreams about? I've been absent for 3 years. I want to learn who my son is." Grace met his eyes, and in her gaze Benjamin saw both skepticism and hope. She'd been hurt before, had watched her brother die for want of resources and attention. She wouldn't easily trust that Benjamin's transformation was real, but she was willing to give him a chance. "All right," she said simply. "But Ben, Dylan's been waiting 3 years for you to come home. Don't start now unless you mean to stay." "I'm staying," Benjamin said, and surprised himself by meaning it. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm done running." The afternoon brought a subtle shift in the Morrison household's atmosphere, like ice beginning to crack beneath warming sun. Benjamin had never spent an entire day at home without illness or emergency forcing his hand, and the strangeness of it settled over him like an unfamiliar coat. Uncomfortable, but not unwelcome. Lunch was simple fare. Grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup that Grace prepared while Dylan told elaborate stories about a squirrel he'd been watching from his bedroom window. The squirrel, whom Dylan had named Chester, apparently had a complicated social life involving territorial disputes with blue jays and an ongoing search for the perfect acorn. Benjamin found himself genuinely engaged in the narrative, asking questions about Chester's habits, learning that his son had been conducting amateur naturalist observations for months. Dylan had notebooks filled with sketches and notes documenting weather patterns and animal behaviors with the methodical attention of a budding scientist. "Do you think Chester knows I'm watching him?" Dylan asked between bites of sandwich. "Grace says animals are smarter than people think." "They are," Benjamin agreed, remembering something from his own childhood that he hadn't thought about in decades. "When I was your age, I had a cardinal that visited my bedroom window every morning. I named him Red. Not very creative, and I convinced myself he came specifically to see me." Dylan's eyes widened. "Did he?" "Probably not. Cardinals are territorial. He was likely defending his space from his own reflection in the glass. But it felt special, like we had a secret friendship." "That's how I feel about Chester," Dylan said softly. "Sometimes I think he waves his tail at me. Grace says I'm being fanciful, but I think he knows." Grace caught Benjamin's eye across the table, a small smile playing at her lips. They were sharing something, he realized. the understanding that Dylan's imagination was both gift and coping mechanism, a way for a lonely child to feel less alone in a house that echoed with emptiness. After lunch, Grace suggested a quiet hour before afternoon therapy. Dylan needed rest, she explained, or his muscles wouldn't cooperate for the second session. Benjamin used the time to make necessary phone calls, explaining to increasingly alarmed executives that he would be unreachable for the foreseeable future. His CFO was particularly insistent. "Benjamin, the board meeting is in 3 days. You can't simply not attend, they'll manage," Benjamin cut him off. "Or they won't, and I'll deal with consequences when I return. Right now, I have priorities that supersede quarterly earnings reports. What could possibly be more important than—" "My son," Benjamin said, and heard the words as if someone else was speaking them. "My son is more important. He's always been more important. I just forgot for a while." He ended the call before his CFO could respond, feeling simultaneously liberated and terrified. He'd built an empire on being indispensable, on the belief that without his constant oversight, everything would collapse. What if he was right? What if his absence caused irreparable damage to Morrison Tech? What if it didn't matter? The thought was dizzying. Benjamin had structured his entire adult life around work, around achievement, around the accumulation of wealth and power that he'd believed would insulate him from life's uncertainties. Catherine's illness had proven the futility of that belief, yet he'd responded by working harder, as if enough money could somehow retroactively change what had happened. At 2 o'clock, they reconvened in the therapy room. Outside, the storm had intensified, snow falling so thickly that the world beyond the windows had become a wall of white. The Weather Service's latest update predicted 3 feet of accumulation, wind gusts to 60 miles per hour, complete road closures throughout the region. They were officially trapped. Dylan seemed energized rather than daunted by the afternoon session. His morning rest had recharged him, and he attacked the parallel bars with renewed determination. Grace had him try a new exercise, walking while carrying a lightweight ball, which forced him to balance differently and engage his core muscles more actively. "This is harder," Dylan grunted after 2 steps. The ball clutched awkwardly to his chest. "Harder means better," Grace encouraged. "Your brain is forming new pathways, teaching your body different ways to move. Struggle is growth, remember?" Benjamin watched the exercise with growing understanding of just how much work went into Dylan's progress. Each step required conscious thought, deliberate muscle engagement, constant self-correction. What came naturally to most children was for Dylan a complex calculation executed dozens of times daily. They were midway through the 3rd repetition when Dylan's left leg buckled. Benjamin lunged forward instinctively, catching his son before he could hit the ground. Dylan's weight in his arms was startlingly light, 6 years old and small for his age, all angles and fragile bones. "I've got you," Benjamin said, and felt Dylan's arms tighten around his neck. "I'm sorry," Dylan whispered. "I'm trying so hard, but sometimes my legs just stop working." Benjamin's chest constricted. "Dylan, look at me." He waited until his son raised his head, blue eyes swimming with frustrated tears. "You don't apologize for your body not cooperating. Do you hear me? What you're doing takes more courage than anything I've ever done. I sit in air-conditioned offices and move money around. You fight your own body every single day and refuse to surrender. You're the bravest person I know." Dylan blinked, processing this. "Braver than soldiers?" "Braver than anyone. Soldiers train for months and go to war for weeks or months. You've been fighting for 6 years straight with no end in sight. That's not bravery. That's heroism." Something shifted in Dylan's expression, a easing of tension Benjamin hadn't realized his son carried. How long had Dylan been apologizing for existing, for requiring extra care, for being inconvenient? How many silent messages had Benjamin sent over 3 years of absence that Dylan had interpreted as disappointment? They continued the session with renewed gentleness, Grace adjusting expectations, celebrating small victories, treating each step as the miracle it was. By 3:30, Dylan had matched his morning total of 5 steps with the ball, a achievement Grace marked on the whiteboard with a gold star. As Dylan rested afterward, Grace pulled Benjamin aside into the hallway, her expression serious. "We need to talk about tonight," she said quietly. "The storm is getting worse. I should probably try to leave now before roads become completely impassable. I can come back once conditions improve, but—" "No," Benjamin interrupted. "Stay. Please. You live what, 30 miles away? You'd never make it safely. We have plenty of room, plenty of food. Stay until the storm passes." Grace hesitated, clearly weighing propriety against practicality. "Mr. Morrison, Ben, I don't think it's appropriate for me to stay overnight. People might—" "Let them think whatever they want," Benjamin said. "I'm asking you to stay because Dylan needs you, because I need to learn from you, and because I'm not willing to risk your safety for the sake of appearances. You've sacrificed enough already. Please, stay." The vulnerability in his voice seemed to decide her. Grace nodded slowly. "All right, but I'll need to call my mother. She'll worry. Use my phone. It has better reception than the house line. And Grace?" Benjamin waited until she met his eyes. "Tell your mother I'll cover any cost if she needs to arrange alternative care or cancel work shifts. No one should worry about money during a blizzard." Grace's expression softened into something Benjamin couldn't quite read. Gratitude mixed with wariness, hope tempered by experience. She'd been let down before, he understood. Promises from wealthy employers probably felt hollow after watching her brother die for want of resources that men like Benjamin spent on wine. He would have to prove himself through action, not words. And the understanding settled into his bones with the weight of a vow. Dinner that evening was the first meal Benjamin had shared with his son in 8 months. Grace roasted chicken with root vegetables, simple comfort food that filled the kitchen with warmth and rich aromas. Dylan insisted on setting the table himself, wheeling between counter and dining room with silverware carefully balanced on his lap. "I'm helping," he announced proudly. "Grace says everyone contributes to the family." Family. The word hung in the air between them, both precious and painful. They weren't a family, not really. They were 3 people thrown together by circumstance and contract, playing at normalcy while a storm raged outside. But sitting there at the table, passing dishes, and making small talk about Chester the squirrel's latest adventures, Benjamin felt the faint outline of what family might look like if he could find the courage to reach for it. After dinner, Dylan asked his father to read him a bedtime story. It was such a simple request, the kind children made of parents everywhere without thought. But Dylan asked it hesitantly, as if expecting rejection. "I'd love to," Benjamin said, and watched Dylan's face transform with joy. They selected 3 books from Dylan's extensive collection, picture books about brave animals and impossible adventures, and settled into Dylan's bed together. Benjamin read slowly, doing voices for different characters, stopping to examine illustrations when Dylan wanted to linger. This intimacy, this casual physical closeness, felt foreign and essential all at once. Halfway through the second book, Dylan interrupted. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why did you start coming home? I mean, I'm happy you did, but what changed?" Benjamin set the book aside, giving the question the consideration it deserved. "I've been running away," he said finally, choosing honesty over comfortable lies. "For 3 years, I've been running from pain and sadness that I didn't know how to handle. But yesterday I came home early and saw you being brave, and I realized you weren't running. You were facing everything head on, doing the hard work every single day while I hid in my office. You shamed me into being better." "I didn't mean to shame you," Dylan said, troubled. Not shame like punishment. Shame like realization. You made me see what real courage looks like. And I decided I wanted to be more like my son. Dylan absorbed this, his small face serious. Then, are you going to leave again, after the storm? The question pierced Benjamin's heart. I'll have to go to work sometimes. I can't be home every moment, but I promise you this, I will never disappear again. I'll have breakfast with you every morning I'm in town. I'll be here for dinner whenever possible. And I'll always be here for bedtime. No matter how late I get home, I'll come say goodnight. Does that sound acceptable? Dylan nodded, then asked the question Benjamin had been dreading. Daddy, is Mommy ever coming home? Benjamin's throat closed. This was the moment he'd avoided for 3 years, the conversation that would require him to either perpetuate the lie or shatter his son's innocence with truths too heavy for a 6-year-old to carry. Before he could formulate a response, Dylan continued in a smaller voice. It's okay if she's not. I heard you talking on the phone sometimes. I know she's not really gone. She's somewhere getting help for being sick, right? The world tilted. You know, I figured it out. Adults think kids don't listen, but we hear everything. It's okay, Daddy. I understand about being sick. My body doesn't work right either. We're both a little broken. Benjamin pulled Dylan close. This impossibly wise child who'd been protecting his father's secret while carrying his own burden. Your mother loves you very much, he said, voice thick. She's sick in a way that makes it impossible for her to be here. But that has nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with you. You didn't cause her illness. You couldn't have prevented it. And wherever she is, whatever state she's in, I promise you she loves you. I love her too, Dylan said simply, even though I barely remember her. Is that weird? It's not weird. It's beautiful. They finished the 3rd book in comfortable silence, Dylan's weight growing heavier against Benjamin's side as sleep claimed him. Benjamin stayed long after his son's breathing had evened into slumber, reluctant to leave this moment, this fragile peace they'd constructed together. When he finally extracted himself and tucked Dylan in, Grace was waiting in the hallway. You handled that well, she said quietly. I didn't handle anything. Dylan's known the truth all along. He's been protecting me. Children often do, Grace observed. They're more resilient than we give them credit for. They stood there in the darkened hallway, the storm howling outside, and Benjamin felt the weight of everything unsaid between them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, he knew. Storms didn't just trap people physically. They forced confrontation with whatever you'd been running from. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Benjamin Morrison fell asleep under the same roof as his son, present in both body and spirit, no longer running from the wreckage of his life, but just beginning, to rebuild from it. The second morning of Storm Cassandra arrived with a silence that felt ominous rather than peaceful. Benjamin woke at 6, disoriented by the absence of his usual alarm, and for a brief moment couldn't remember why he was still in the mansion instead of preparing for his morning commute to the office. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. The discovery of Dylan's therapy, Grace's story about Liam, his own decision to cancel everything and stay. The smell of coffee drew him downstairs where he found Grace already in the kitchen, but something was wrong. Her laptop sat open on the counter, her face drained of all color as she stared at the screen. Her hands gripped the counter edge so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Grace? Benjamin moved quickly toward her. What's happened? She didn't seem to hear him at first. Her brown eyes remained fixed on whatever email she was reading, her chest rising and falling with increasingly rapid breaths that Benjamin recognized as the precursor to panic. Grace, he said again more firmly, touching her shoulder. She flinched, then turned to him with eyes that had gone glassy with shock. It's my mother. The hospital just sent this. She collapsed at work last night. At the warehouse. They're saying she had a cardiac event. She's at Boulder Community Hospital right now, and they're telling me she needs surgery within 48 hours or—" Her voice broke completely. "I need to get to her. I need to go right now." Benjamin's mind shifted immediately into the problem-solving mode that had made him successful in business. He moved to look at the email over Grace's shoulder, scanning the medical terminology quickly. Mitral valve repair, acute heart failure, emergency surgery recommended. And then a detail that made his chest tighten. A list of unpaid medical bills dating back 2 years, insurance that had lapsed 3 months ago. "Why wasn't she treating this?" Benjamin asked. "Her medical history shows she's known about the atrial fibrillation for years." Grace's hands were shaking now. "She told me she was fine. She said the doctors had everything under control. But Ben, look at these bills. Look at the dates." She pointed at the screen with a trembling finger. "Every time I sent her money for rent, for groceries, for her medications, she wasn't using it. She was putting it into a savings account. For me, for Grace's education fund. It says right here in the hospital's financial records. She's been working double shifts at the warehouse despite knowing her heart was failing because she wanted to save enough to send me to physical therapy school." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Benjamin thought of his own mother, long deceased, and wondered if she would have sacrificed herself the same way. He thought of Catherine, who had tried to hurt their son because her mind had betrayed her. And now, here was Margaret Campbell, working herself literally to death so her daughter could pursue a dream deferred by tragedy. "The roads," Grace said desperately, pulling out her phone. "I need to check the roads. Maybe if I leave right now." "The roads are completely closed," Benjamin said gently. "Highway 82 is impassable. The storm upgraded to a full blizzard overnight. Nothing's moving, Grace. Not civilian traffic, not even most emergency vehicles." Grace's face crumpled. "Then she's alone. My mother is dying alone in a hospital, and I can't get to her. I can't lose her too. Not after Liam. I can't lose both of them because of money and bad luck and—" "Stop," Benjamin said firmly, taking her by the shoulders. "You're not going to lose her. And you're not going to be stuck here helpless. Give me 5 minutes." He pulled out his phone and began making calls. First to Dr. Richard Harrison, his personal physician, who had privileges at Boulder Community Hospital. Then to his aviation company. Then to the hospital administrator directly. Grace watched with something like awe as Benjamin Morrison, the cold, untouchable billionaire, transformed into a man mobilizing every resource at his disposal to save a 63-year-old warehouse worker he'd never met. "Richard, I need you at Boulder Community within the hour," Benjamin said into the phone. "Patient is Margaret Campbell, acute mitral valve failure, needs emergency surgery. I'm covering all costs personally. Assemble your best team. I don't care if you have to helicopter them in from Denver. Get it done." He ended that call and immediately made another. "This is Benjamin Morrison. I need a medical helicopter cleared for flight the moment weather permits. Destination Boulder Community Hospital. Passenger is Grace Campbell, priority transport. I'm aware of the storm conditions. I'm asking you to be ready the instant there's a break. The fee is irrelevant. Have the helicopter standing by." When he finally set down his phone, Grace was crying openly, one hand pressed over her mouth. "The surgery will happen this afternoon," Benjamin said. "Dr. Harrison is the best cardiac surgeon in the state. Your mother will have round-the-clock nursing care, private room, full cardiac rehabilitation program afterward. And as soon as the wind dies down enough for the helicopter to fly safely, they're estimating around noon, you'll be on your way to her." "Ben, I can't possibly afford—" "You're not paying for any of it. Consider it a signing bonus for your new position." He met her eyes steadily. Your mother has spent the last 2 years sacrificing her health so you could pursue your education. The least I can do is ensure she survives to see you actually become a licensed physical therapist, which you will, Grace. I'm funding the full program, and I'm setting up a trust fund for Margaret. She's never working another warehouse shift as long as she lives. Grace's legs seemed to give out. She sat down heavily on one of the kitchen stools, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. You don't know my mother at all. Why would you? Benjamin pulled out the other stool and sat facing her, his expression more open than Grace had ever seen it. Because I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and for 3 years I've been using it to build monuments to my own failure, while people like your mother work themselves to death for lack of basic resources. Because my son loves you, and you've given him something I couldn't, hope and dignity, and the belief that his body doesn't define his worth. And because, he paused, choosing his words carefully, because when I look at you sacrificing everything for Dylan, I see what love looks like when it's not corrupted by guilt or fear or the need to run away from pain. You're teaching me how to be present. The least I can do is ensure you don't lose your mother the way you lost your brother. The mention of Liam seemed to break something in Grace. She leaned forward, and Benjamin found himself wrapping his arms around her in a gesture that felt both natural and terrifying. She wasn't his employee in that moment, or even just Dylan's caregiver. She was a daughter terrified of losing her last parent. And he was someone who finally understood that money only mattered when you used it to protect the people who needed protecting. They stayed like that for several minutes until a small voice from the doorway made them both look up. Grace? Dylan sat in his wheelchair at the kitchen entrance, his blue eyes wide with worry. Why are you crying? Are you sad? Grace pulled away from Benjamin quickly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Grace's mommy is sick, sweetheart. She needs a special doctor to help her feel better. Dylan's face went through several emotions: confusion, understanding, then fear. Is Grace's mommy going to die like Grace's brother? The question was so direct, so stripped of the euphemisms adults use to protect children from harsh realities, that both Benjamin and Grace were momentarily speechless. I hope not, Grace said finally, her voice thick. Your daddy is helping make sure she gets the best doctors. But Dylan, I need to go to the hospital to be with her. I need to... You're leaving? The fear in Dylan's voice was palpable. You're leaving me? Benjamin saw it then, the pattern Dylan had learned, the trauma response that had been reinforced over and over. People left, mother left. And now Grace, the one person who'd shown up every day without fail for 6 months, was leaving too. Just for a little while, Grace said, moving toward Dylan. Just until my mommy is better. And then I'll come right back. I promise. That's what Mommy said, Dylan whispered. And the words hung in the air like an accusation. The second day of storm, Cassandra dawned gray and muffled. The world outside transformed into something unrecognizable. Snow had accumulated past the first-floor windows in places where the wind had created drifts, and the few bare tree branches visible through the white curtain bent under impossible weight. The power had flickered twice during the night, but held, the house's backup generator humming reassuringly in the basement. Benjamin woke early from habit, disoriented briefly by the unfamiliar sensation of having slept deeply. No nightmares had plagued him, no 3 a.m. awakening to drive to Evergreen and sit outside Catherine's door in penance. He'd simply slept, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion it had been fighting for 3 years. The smell of coffee drew him downstairs where Grace was already in the kitchen, her laptop open on the counter, concern etched across her features. She looked up as Benjamin entered, and he saw immediately that something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked. Grace turned the laptop toward him, showing an email from a Boulder area code. "It's the hospital. My mother collapsed at work last night. They're saying she had a cardiac event. Her heart. They took her to Boulder Community Hospital, but they're saying she needs surgery within 48 hours or—" Her voice broke. "I need to get to her, Ben, but the roads are completely closed. Nothing's moving. The hospital says even emergency services can't reach some areas." Benjamin's mind shifted immediately into problem-solving mode, the same focused clarity that made him successful in business. What kind of surgery? What's the prognosis? Mitral valve repair. Her atrial fibrillation has been getting worse. I didn't know how bad until now. Apparently, she's been hiding symptoms for months, maybe longer. The hospital administrator sent me her chart, and Ben, there are unpaid bills going back 2 years. She's been letting her supplemental insurance lapse to— Grace's hands trembled as she gripped the laptop edge. To send me money. Every time I sent her money for living expenses, she was putting it into a savings account labeled Grace's Education Fund. She's been working double shifts at the warehouse despite knowing her heart was failing because she wanted to save enough to send me to physical therapy school. The revelation hit Benjamin with the force of recognition. Margaret Campbell was doing for Grace exactly what he should have been doing for Dylan, sacrificing everything out of love while the recipient remained oblivious. The parallel was too precise to ignore. "Call my personal physician," Benjamin said decisively, pulling out his phone. "Dr. Harrison has privileges at Boulder Community. I'll have him arrange the surgery, handle all costs, and ensure your mother receives the best possible care. As for you getting there, roads may be closed for civilian traffic, but I have contacts. Give me 30 minutes. Ben, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering. Your mother has been working herself to death to give you opportunities she never had. The least I can do is ensure she survives to see you take advantage of them." Within 20 minutes, Benjamin had arranged for a private helicopter to transport Grace to Boulder the moment weather permitted, estimated around noon if the wind died down. Dr. Harrison had already reviewed Margaret's chart and was coordinating with the cardiac surgery team at the hospital. The surgery would happen that afternoon, fully funded, with round-the-clock private nursing care afterward. Grace sat at the kitchen counter, tears streaming silently down her face. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." "You barely know my mother." Benjamin poured himself coffee, considering how to answer honestly without revealing the full depth of his own guilt and need for redemption. "Because I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and for 3 years I've been using it to build monuments to my own failure while people like your mother work themselves to death for lack of basic resources. Because Dylan loves you, and you've given him something I couldn't— hope. And because—" he paused, meeting her eyes. "Because when I look at you sacrificing for Dylan, I see what love looks like when it's not corrupted by guilt or fear. You're teaching me how to be present. The least I can do is ensure you don't lose your mother the way you lost your brother." The mention of Liam hung between them, a ghost neither had fully addressed. Grace wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. "When I get back, if I get back before the storm ends, we need to talk about what happens next. About boundaries, about what's appropriate for an employer and employee, about—" "We'll figure it out," Benjamin assured her. "Right now, focus on your mother. Dylan and I will manage here. We're trapped in a house together with nothing but time. Maybe that's exactly what we need." At 8 o'clock, Benjamin sat down with Dylan for breakfast and explained that Grace would be leaving for a few hours to visit her sick mother. Dylan's face fell with immediate worry. Is Grace's mom going to die like Grace's brother? The question was so direct, so stripped of childish euphemism that Benjamin felt his breath catch. "I hope not. We're doing everything we can to help her. But Dylan, sometimes, even when we do everything right, people still get sick. Grace's brother died because of mistakes other people made." Her mother is sick because she worked too hard trying to take care of Grace. Sometimes love makes people do things that hurt themselves. Like how you work all the time? Dylan asked, and the observation cut deep. Yes, Benjamin admitted, like how I work all the time. I've been hurting myself with work the same way Grace's mother hurt herself with work. We both thought we were helping the people we loved, but really we were just running away from being present. Dylan absorbed this with his characteristic seriousness. Are you going to keep running? No, I'm done running, but Dylan, Grace may not come back today. The storm might keep her in Boulder overnight. It'll be just you and me. Are you okay with that? Dylan's expression cycled through several emotions: uncertainty, fear, hope, before landing on something resembling determination. Will you do therapy with me, like Grace does? I'll try. I'm not as good at it as Grace, but I've been watching and learning. We'll figure it out together. The helicopter arrived at 11:30, landing in the one clear section of the Morrison Estate's extensive grounds. Benjamin walked Grace out, Dylan watching from the window. Before she boarded, Grace gripped Benjamin's arm. If something happens, if my mother doesn't make it, I need you to know that what you've done for Dylan, it matters. Don't stop. Don't retreat back into work. He needs you. I know, Benjamin said. And Grace, your mother's going to be fine. Dr. Harrison is the best cardiac surgeon in Colorado. She'll pull through, and when she's recovered, she's not going back to that warehouse. I'm setting up a trust fund for her. She's earned the right to rest. Grace's eyes filled with tears again, but she boarded without further protest. Benjamin stood in the snow watching the helicopter lift off, its rotors kicking up blinding white clouds until it disappeared into the gray sky. Then he turned back to the house, to his son waiting at the window, to the responsibility he could no longer avoid. The afternoon therapy session was harder than Benjamin anticipated. Without Grace's expertise, he fumbled with the stretching routine, uncertain of how much pressure to apply, afraid of hurting Dylan while knowing that avoiding discomfort meant avoiding progress. Dylan guided him through it with patience that seemed impossible for a 6-year-old. Not that way, Daddy. Grace bends my knee like this, see? It needs to go further, but slowly. You're being too gentle because you're scared. I'm not going to break. Benjamin adjusted his approach, following Dylan's instructions, and felt a shift in their dynamic. His son was teaching him, demonstrating competence and understanding that Benjamin had never acknowledged. When had Dylan learned so much about his own body, his own condition? How many hours had he spent studying, practicing, pushing himself while Benjamin remained obliviously absent? They managed 3 sets of walking exercises, Dylan achieving 6 steps each time, one more than yesterday. Benjamin marked it on the whiteboard with a gold star, and Dylan beamed with pride that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Grace was right, Dylan said. You're learning fast. I have a good teacher, Benjamin replied, and meant it. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Benjamin chopping vegetables under Dylan's supervision, while his son sat at the counter giving directions, Benjamin's phone rang. It was Dr. Harrison. The surgery went perfectly, the doctor reported. Margaret is in recovery now, stable and expected to make a full recovery. Her daughter hasn't left her side. The prognosis is excellent, Benjamin. She'll need several weeks of rest and cardiac rehab, but she should regain full function. Benjamin closed his eyes in relief. Thank you, Richard. Send me the full accounting of costs and arrange for the best cardiac rehabilitation program in Boulder. Money is no object. After ending the call, Benjamin relayed the news to Dylan, who pumped his fist in victory. Grace's mom is going to be okay. That means Grace won't be sad anymore. She's always a little bit sad, Daddy. Did you notice? Even when she's smiling, there's sad hiding underneath. The observation was so precise, so emotionally intelligent, that Benjamin wondered again how he'd missed so much about his son's inner life. You notice things other people don't you? I notice everything, Dylan said matter-of-factly. When you can't run around and play, you watch instead. You see patterns, like how you touch your wedding ring when you're thinking about something sad, or how Grace holds her breath for exactly 3 seconds when someone mentions her brother, or how the housekeeper misses. Jen only cleans the West Wing on Tuesdays because that's when her soap opera isn't on television. Benjamin looked down at his left hand, where the platinum band still encircled his ring finger despite 3 years of separation. He hadn't realized he touched it unconsciously. What other tells did he have that his observant son had catalogued? They ate dinner in comfortable quiet, the storm still raging outside but feeling somehow less threatening now that they'd weathered the day together. Benjamin read 3 more stories at bedtime, and when Dylan asked him to stay until he fell asleep, Benjamin settled into the chair beside the bed without hesitation. "Daddy?" Dylan's voice came soft in the darkness. "I'm glad you came home early. I've been wishing for it every night, and I thought wishes didn't work. But maybe they do if you wait long enough." Benjamin's throat tightened. "I'm glad too. I've wasted so much time, Dylan. Time I can never get back. But I promise you, every day going forward, I'm going to do better. I'm going to be the father you deserve." "You already are," Dylan murmured, sleep claiming him. "You're here, that's all I wanted. Just for you to be here." Benjamin sat in the darkened room long after Dylan's breathing evened into sleep, wrestling with emotions he'd suppressed for years. Grief for Catherine, for the life they'd planned that would never materialize. Guilt for Dylan, for 3 years of absence that no amount of present attention could erase. Gratitude for Grace, who'd given them both a roadmap back to each other, and underneath it all, fragile as new ice, something that might eventually become hope. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Mom's awake. She's asking for me to tell you thank you. I don't have words for what you've done. We'll talk when I get back. Take care of our boy. Our boy." The possessive stung and soothed simultaneously. Grace had claimed a piece of Dylan's heart that Benjamin had abandoned, and he couldn't begrudge her that. Dylan needed all the love he could get from whatever source provided it. Benjamin responded simply, "He's asleep. 6 steps today, making progress. Take all the time you need. We're learning." Outside, Storm Cassandra showed no signs of abating. The Weather Service now predicted 4 feet of total accumulation, possibly 5, with the storm system stalling over the Rockies. They could be trapped for another 3 days, just Benjamin and Dylan, forced into proximity that would either heal or destroy whatever remained of their relationship. Benjamin found himself hoping for the former while preparing for the latter. Either way, there was no more running. The storm had seen to that. Sometimes we spend our whole lives building empires, careers, bank accounts, reputations, only to realize we've been constructing monuments to our own loneliness. Benjamin Morrison had everything money could buy, yet he was bankrupt where it mattered most. In the currency of presence, of showing up, of being there when small hands reached for him in the darkness. How many of us have made the same mistake? We tell ourselves we're working hard for our families when really we're just running from the vulnerability of genuine connection. We convince ourselves that providing materially is enough, that our children or grandchildren will understand our absence if we leave them financial security. But what Dylan needed wasn't his father's money. He needed his father's time, his attention, his willingness to sit with discomfort and not flee. The beautiful truth this storm revealed is that it's never too late to come home, never too late to choose presence over productivity, never too late to learn that the bravest thing we can do is simply stay. When was the last time you truly showed up for someone who needed you? What would it take for you to stop running and finally come home to the people who've been waiting? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.